Let's rewind the clock a bit to 3 weeks ago. On April 1st, the day of Fools, a small party game by the name of Content Warning hit the Steam shelves. And in just a few hours, it had over 45,000 players, which quadrupled to 200,000 players by the time April 2nd rolled around. Article after article started to be written about how this game had one of the best releases in recent history and might even give Lethal Company some competition. A YouTube video that got over 100,000 views even called it a game that had completely broken the internet, causing even more people to find the game and want to play it. But now, let's put all of that aside for a moment and come back to present time, where Content Warning lies forgotten. Averaging a player count of barely 9,000 players per day, and known only to the small minority of players who played it on day one. From a game that had so much promise to now gathering dust in the dark recesses of Steam, this is the story of how a party game turned into a chore. This is the story of the disappointing downfall of Content Warning. Though at this point, I'm sure half of you are wondering what this game is about. So here's a quick recap. You are one of these nameless players who want to become big-time YouTubers. For that purpose, you and 3 of your friends have to descend to a foggy area called the Old World, a very mysterious place where you can explore some ruins. You have some oxygen and a camera, and have to film strange things like old artifacts and even monsters that try to attack you. If you manage to get some good footage and escape all of the monsters, you can then upload your video in the in-game version of YouTube and get in-game money depending on how many views your video gets. More money means you can buy better gear, which means better footage, which means better views, which means more money. Though an important point to note here is that while it feels like Content Warning just came out of nowhere, there is an actual team behind the title. It is the latest game released by Landfall Studios, the people behind some good games like Totally Accurate Battle Simulators, better known as Tabs. While they haven't found too much success and are barely known, most of the people who like their work really like their work a lot, considering that Tabs has an over 95% positive review score. But with the success of Lethal Company, a game that, much like how Content Warning is trying to be, seemingly came from nowhere, Landfall Studios thought to themselves that even they could create a fun party game. After all, every game they have made until now was a hit with their dedicated fanbase. So all they really needed to do was figure out a way to make a game that everyone would enjoy. And so, they did exactly that. There were a lot of reasons why Lethal Company worked, but the biggest reason behind its success is easily how fun it was with friends. People could play the games and bond with their teammates for hours at a time, and it created an environment where you would have no shortage of funny moments. And if you don't believe my word, just consider the fact that it won the Better with Friends award in the 2023 Steam Awards. If you want to know more about why Lethal Company is just so good, then you can go and check our video on it. But coming back to Content Warning, the stakes for Landfall Studios were pretty high. They needed to put together all of their resources, use all of their knowledge from making multiple games in the past, and they might just recreate the magic that Lethal Company had in a completely new format. And for a while, it worked. As I mentioned at the start of this video, the game had gained over 200,000 players within 24 hours of the launch, and when you look at the facts, it's easy to see why it was so popular at launch. It was released on April 1st, and as a way to excite players about the game, Landfall Studios announced that anyone who claims the game within the next 24 hours wouldn't have to pay a single cent for it. At first, news traveled slowly, but soon everyone realized that this was not an April Fool's prank. The game was actually available for free. So there was a rush to claim the game, and within their very first day, it was reported that Content Warning had been claimed by over 6 million players. Not only that, but it had many of the same advantages as Lethal Company. It was a team-based game, which meant that the game growed at an exponential speed as people convinced all their friends to download the title as well. Though one thing that it did much better than Lethal Company was creating an awesome sandbox where people could create their own story. Unlike the game it was inspired by, Content Warning doesn't really have many cool gimmicks that you can interact with and doesn't innovate much gameplay-wise. What it does have though is an amazing world where players can roleplay with their friends for hours and hours. Just think of a group of friends role-playing as extremely cowardly historians. At the first sight of a monster, all of them scatter and run away, and they mostly make footage of artifacts since they are too scared when it comes to the monsters. Then one of them finally snaps, becoming a lot more courageous and deciding that the best decision was to invest all of their money into strong gear. He becomes their leader and helps them get to even newer heights under his command. But one day, he falls in battle and his cowardly teammates have to make it out of the old world on their own. Content Warning has an insane potential for stories like this to take place, and that is its biggest strength. Eventually, all of these advantages came together to form a game which had 50,000 players within the first 12 hours, a number that increased to over 200,000 within 12 hours more. But then everything just stopped. April 3rd was the day when views first dropped, going down to only 110,000 players. From there, it was all the way downhill to 66,000 players on April 5th, then 28,000 players on April 10th, to the mere 9,000 players on April 20th today. It is just as popular as most of the other games released by Landfall Studios, and would probably continue to average 10,000 players every day for a good while to come. But it's hard to see it as a success, considering just how much potential the game had. A game where you have to make viral content went from being viral itself to being just one more game amongst thousands, like a YouTube video that gets no views and no money. It's almost poetic now that the game was released on April 1st, because all of the popularity it received in the early days of its release seems to be nothing more than a bad joke. But just how did it fall off so fast? Well, for one, I mentioned how fun it is to have adventures in a game like Content Warning, where you make your own story. But not everyone can enjoy a game like that. And for many people, it can feel boring pretty quickly. Moreover, a player group may disagree between themselves about what to roleplay as, or maybe some players wouldn't want to roleplay at all. There's a lot of fine-tuning needed before Content Warning can properly capitalize on it. Another thing that held it back a lot is just how taxing it is to play the game. Most of us play video games as a way to deal with real-life stress and to unwind after a long day. But as JP and his friends said on their podcast, Drop Frames,
by the end of our 4, maybe 5 hour session, I forgot how we played, we were all fucking exhausted because we were like, quote, turning it on for video like you do if you're recording a YouTube video or something like that.
Like you play this game if you want to like have fun with friends, but like put on a show kind of thing, right? You don't, that like it has a completely different feel in Lethal Company, and one that I kind of like, at the end I was like, yeah, that was fun, but yeah, you know, on to like a real game.
They also pointed out later on the podcast that there wasn't really much to do other than fiddle with the cameras, which makes the game a lot more constrained than it should be. In their own words, the moment the camera was not there, your interest in the game just plummeted. If it had some sort of missions where, for example, you have a Pokédex sort of thing where you get points for finding all the different monsters, or maybe you could allow players to create their own areas for other players to explore, would create a completely new layer to the game. Ultimately, the game is just not engaging at all. Some players may enjoy it, but for most players, it feels like Lethal Company with half the mechanics. There are a lot of things that the game can improve on, which might give it a better chance and help it become popular again in the future. For example, I talked about adding new gimmicks in the game so that players have more things to do. But not only that, the developers can take it a step further and make specific campaigns where the players have to make videos in a certain way to get access to some story. One of these campaigns could be the cowardly historians that I mentioned earlier. Another could be a team of trigger-happy army veterans who don't care about any artifacts and instead keep trying to attack the monsters and take the fight to them. They can even partner with other games like Helldivers 2 and make the campaign themed around them. They could also create roles other than the camera. One person might be in ground control, where they cannot go in and help the team directly, but are given access to security cameras that help them keep track of the monsters. They could even be incentivized to misreport and get extra money if their team fails the mission, which could cause a lot of funny and interesting moments. When it comes to any game, the sky's the limit, and with the amazing system that Landfall Studios have developed for the game, it is honestly disappointing to see it going to waste when it could be so much more. As of now, it seems like it might never come back into mainstream gaming, though it is reported that around 7 million people have the game in their Steam library right now, which means that if the developers work hard on it and update it well, there might still be some time to turn things around and make amends. But no matter what happens with Content Warning in the future, as the game shows us, once a video has been posted to the internet, it can never truly go away. Whether this entire story ends up as a small footnote in the journey of Content Warning or as the end of a promising game, the mistakes that were made won't be forgotten by the players and, more importantly, the developers anytime soon. If you enjoyed watching, make sure to go check out our other video on how the downfall of multiverses could have secretly been a blessing.